The morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal at Atlanta International Airport as Dr. Sarah Thompson pulled up in her silver Mercedes. It was 7:15 a.m., and the air already carried the warmth of a typical Georgia summer day. The 35-year-old neurosurgeon adjusted her navy blazer and checked her reflection in the car window, making sure she looked as professional as her reputation demanded. Today was supposed to be routine, a private flight to Boston for a medical conference where she would be sharing her groundbreaking research on pediatric brain surgery. She had made this trip many times before, though usually on commercial flights. But this time, the conference organizers had arranged private transportation for their keynote speaker. Sarah's heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked toward the terminal entrance, pulling her designer carry-on bag behind her. Her dark curly hair was neatly tied back, and her crisp white shirt contrasted perfectly with her smooth dark skin. She had learned early in her career that appearance mattered, especially for a black woman in a field dominated by older white men. Several other passengers lounged in the exclusive waiting area, mostly older men in expensive suits, some accompanied by their families. A few glanced up as she entered, then returned to their phones or newspapers. Sarah was used to being the only black person in such spaces, but it never stopped her from carrying herself with dignity and confidence. The terminal itself was a testament to luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and comfortable leather chairs were arranged in small groups. The air smelled of fresh coffee from an upscale cafe in the corner, where a barista was crafting elaborate drinks for early morning travelers. Sarah approached the check-in counter, where a young woman named Jessica smiled warmly at her. As she reached for her ID and flight documentation, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Praying for a safe flight, baby girl. Show them what you're made of." A small smile crossed her face as she read it. The past week had been particularly busy at the hospital. Sarah had performed 3 complex surgeries, including one on a 5-year-old girl with a rare brain tumor. The surgery had been successful, and the thought of sharing her innovative technique with other surgeons at the conference filled her with purpose. This could help save many more young lives. As she waited for Jessica to process her documents, Sarah noticed a security guard watching her intently from his post near the entrance. Something about his gaze made her uncomfortable, but she brushed it off. After 15 years in medicine, she had developed a thick skin against prejudice and preconceptions. Taking a sip from her travel mug of green tea, Sarah checked the time again, 7:25 a.m. Her flight wasn't until 8:30 a.m., but she always believed in being early. It was a habit instilled by her father, a retired high school principal who used to say, "Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable." The morning light streamed through the terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows, creating patterns on the marble floor. Outside, several private jets stood gleaming on the tarmac, their surfaces reflecting the early morning sun. Sarah could see ground crew members moving efficiently around the aircraft, performing their pre-flight checks. She took out her presentation notes, wanting to review them one more time. The paper she was presenting detailed a new surgical approach that reduced operating time by 30% while improving patient outcomes. It was work she was proud of, work that had taken 3 years of research and countless hours in the operating room to perfect. Just then, Jessica handed back her documents with a professional smile. "You're all set, Dr. Thompson. Your flight is on schedule, and someone will come to escort you to your aircraft in about 45 minutes. Sarah nodded her thanks and turned toward the seating area. That's when she noticed the security guard had moved closer, his eyes still fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. Something in his posture suggested trouble, but Sarah squared her shoulders and held her head high. Whatever was coming, she would handle it with the same grace and determination that had carried her through medical school, residency, and to the top of her field. Little did she know that the next few minutes would turn this routine morning into a viral moment that would spark a national conversation about racism and privilege in America's most exclusive spaces. Richard Wells had worked as a security guard at the private aviation terminal for 15 years, and he had very specific ideas about who belonged there. As he watched Dr. Sarah Thompson walk across the terminal floor, his face hardened into a frown. He straightened his blue uniform, adjusted his badge, and began walking toward her with purposeful steps. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying across the quiet terminal. "I'm going to need you to stop right there." His hand rested on his belt as he approached, despite Sarah being clearly unarmed and professionally dressed. Sarah turned to face him, maintaining her professional composure. She had dealt with similar situations before, though usually not in such an exclusive setting. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly, holding her ID and flight documents in her hand. "Yes, there is," Wells replied, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. "This is a private aviation terminal. I think you must have made a mistake." He emphasized the word private, as if explaining something to a child, his tone dripping with condescension. Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "There's no mistake. I'm Dr. Sarah Thompson, and I have a chartered flight to Boston at 8:30. She held out her documentation, but Wells made no move to take it. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked her up and down. "Right. And I'm the President of the United States." A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others pretended not to notice the confrontation unfolding before them. Sarah's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, I've already checked in with the desk. You can verify my identity and flight details with them." She gestured toward Jessica at the check-in counter, who was watching the scene with growing concern. "Listen here." Wells stepped closer, lowering his voice but maintaining his aggressive tone. "I've worked here for 15 years. I know who belongs and who doesn't. Now, you can either leave on your own, or I'll have to call the police." At this point, Sarah quietly pulled out her phone and began recording. "Please, go ahead and call them," she said firmly. "I'd like them to witness how you're treating a paying customer who has every right to be here." Wells' face reddened. "Are you threatening me? You can't record me." He reached for her phone, but Sarah stepped back, keeping the camera steady. Just then, another passenger walked past them, an older white man in a golf shirt and khakis. Wells didn't even glance in his direction. The double standard was now clearly captured on video. "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah stated calmly. "I'm a neurosurgeon heading to Boston to deliver a keynote speech at a medical conference. I've shown you my ID and flight documentation. Your behavior is inappropriate and discriminatory." Wells scoffed. "A neurosurgeon? Right. And where did you get those fancy papers? Anyone can print stuff from the internet these days." He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "Can you believe this? She's claiming to be a brain surgeon." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with anger and humiliation, but she remained poised. Years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room had taught her to stay calm under stress. She noticed several passengers had also taken out their phones, recording the incident. Jessica from the check-in desk was now on the phone, speaking urgently to someone while keeping her eyes on the situation. Through the terminal windows, Sarah could see her chartered jet being prepared for departure, the ground crew going about their normal routine, unaware of the drama unfolding inside. "Sir," Sarah spoke clearly, making sure her voice was picked up by the recording, "I'm giving you one last chance to check my credentials properly and apologize for your behavior. Otherwise, I will be filing a formal complaint about this discriminatory treatment." Wells stepped even closer, his face now just inches from hers. "Is that so? Well, let me tell you something." He never got to finish his sentence, because at that moment, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Dr. Thompson, is everything all right here?" The voice belonged to someone who was about to change the entire situation, Captain Michael Rodriguez, and he did not look happy about what he was witnessing. Captain Michael Rodriguez's arrival should have calmed the situation, but Richard Wells wasn't ready to back down. The security guard's face grew even redder as he turned to face the pilot, who stood tall in his crisp black uniform with gold stripes on the shoulders. "Captain, this woman claims she has a private flight booked," Wells said, emphasizing the word claims with obvious skepticism. "I'm just doing my job protecting our exclusive clientele." Captain Rodriguez frowned. "Dr. Thompson is one of our regular passengers, Mr. Wells. I've personally flown her 3 times in the past year." He turned to Sarah with an apologetic look. "I'm so sorry about this, Doctor. I heard the commotion from the pilot's lounge." Wells shook his head stubbornly. "With all due respect, Captain, I need to see some additional verification. We can't be too careful these days." His hand still rested on his security belt, despite the pilot's confirmation of Sarah's identity. By now, a small crowd had gathered in the terminal. Business executives lowered their newspapers to watch. A group of flight attendants whispered among themselves near the coffee shop. Everyone had their phones out, recording the scene. Sarah kept her own phone steady, documenting everything. "Captain Rodriguez," she said calmly, "I appreciate you coming to help, but Mr. Wells here has already threatened to call the police. Perhaps we should let him do that." Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart was pounding. A well-dressed white woman walked past them toward another gate, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Wells didn't even glance in her direction. The contrast in treatment was obvious to everyone watching, and several people in the crowd shook their heads in disapproval. "Mr. Wells," Captain Rodriguez said firmly, "Dr. Thompson is a renowned neurosurgeon. She's flying with us to Boston to deliver a keynote speech at Massachusetts General Hospital. Now, I suggest you—" "A neurosurgeon?" Wells interrupted with a harsh laugh. "Come on, look at her." As soon as the words left his mouth, a collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Several people began typing furiously on their phones, sharing what they were witnessing on social media. Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and controlled. "Mr. Wells, I want you to explain exactly what you mean by 'look at her.' Please, tell everyone here what about my appearance makes you doubt I'm a neurosurgeon." The terminal fell silent. Wells opened and closed his mouth, suddenly aware of how many people were recording him. Sweat began to form on his forehead. That's not what he stammered, but Sarah continued. "Is it my gender, my age, or is it, perhaps, the color of my skin?" She held his gaze steadily. "'Cause I've shown you my ID, my flight documents, and now the captain has confirmed my identity. So what exactly is the problem here?" Jessica from the check-in desk had now joined them, holding a printed passenger manifest. "Mr. Wells, I have Dr. Thompson's complete flight records here. She's flown from our terminal multiple times." But Wells, trapped in his own prejudice, made one final mistake. Anyone can fake documents. He snapped. "For all we know, she could be trying to steal from the planes. These people often." "These people?" Sarah's voice cut through his words like a surgeon's scalpel. "Please, Mr. Wells, finish that sentence. These people what?" The crowd's phones captured every word, every gesture. A young flight attendant in the background wiped away tears. An elderly businessman stood up from his seat, shaking his head in disgust. Captain Rodriguez stepped between them. "That's enough. Mr. Wells, I'm calling your supervisor right now. This is completely unacceptable." But Sarah raised her hand. "No need, Captain. I think Mr. Wells has said quite enough." She turned to address the crowd directly. "I want everyone here to witness this. This is what we deal with, even in 2024, even with all the right credentials, even in the most exclusive spaces." She turned back to Wells, who now looked pale and uncertain. "And you know what the saddest part is? I actually operated on your colleague's daughter last month at Atlanta General. And the Martinez? The girl with the brain tumor? That was me, the surgeon you couldn't believe exists." The revelation hit Wells like a physical blow. His face went from red to ash-white as he remembered the photos in the break room of little Emma recovering after her successful surgery, smiling with the doctor who saved her life. The same woman he was now profiling and harassing. The video clips were already spreading across social media like wildfire, and this was only the beginning of what would become a viral story about prejudice, power, and the faces of modern discrimination. The terminal buzzed with activity as news of the confrontation spread quickly through the building. Security Supervisor Mark Davidson rushed through the main doors, his face showing deep concern as he assessed the situation. He had received 3 urgent calls in the past 5 minutes. One from Captain Rodriguez, another from the terminal manager, and a third from his own boss. "What in God's name is going on here?" Davidson demanded, looking between Wells and Dr. Thompson. His eyes widened as he recognized Sarah from a recent terminal newsletter featuring distinguished passengers. Wells started to speak, but Davidson held up his hand. "Not a word from you right now." He turned to Sarah, his expression apologetic. "Dr. Thompson, I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am about this situation." Sarah's phone was still recording everything. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, with even some of the ground crew coming inside to witness the unfolding drama. The morning sun now streamed fully through the terminal's large windows, highlighting the tension on everyone's faces. "Mr. Davidson," Sarah spoke clearly, her professional demeanor intact despite the ordeal. "Your employee has spent the last 20 minutes harassing me, threatening me with arrest and making barely veiled racist comments, all while letting other passengers walk by freely. To prove her point, another group of passengers entered the terminal at that moment, all white, all walking past without Wells giving them a second glance. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, checking his watch. Dr. Thompson's flight needs to leave in 30 minutes. She has a crucial medical conference to attend. He glared at Wells, who was now staring at the floor, his earlier bravado completely deflated. Davidson nodded quickly. Of course. Wells, hand over your badge and radio. You're suspended effective immediately. When Wells hesitated, Davidson's voice hardened. Now. With trembling hands, Wells unpinned his security badge and unclipped his radio. The same man who had been so aggressive minutes ago now looked small and defeated. As he handed over his equipment, he couldn't meet anyone's eyes. An older black janitor watching from the corner shook his head sadly. "Ain't nothing new," he muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Just got caught this time." Sarah checked her phone and saw that clips of the incident were already going viral. Her own recording had captured everything perfectly. Wells' aggressive behavior, his discriminatory comments, and the revelation about Emma Martinez's surgery. "Mr. Davidson," she said, her voice firm but professional, "I want a formal record of this incident, and I want to know what actions your company will take to prevent this from happening to someone else." Davidson nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Doctor. I'll personally escort you to your aircraft, and I promise you, this will be addressed at the highest levels." He turned to Wells. "Wait in my office." As Wells slunk away, Emma Martinez's father, a maintenance worker at the terminal, came running in. He had heard about the incident and rushed over from the hangar area. "Dr. Thompson," his voice cracked with emotion, "I just heard what happened. I can't believe. After what you did for my Emma." Sarah's professional composure softened slightly. "How is she doing, Mr. Martinez?" "She's perfect, thanks to you," he said, tears in his eyes. "She's back in school, playing soccer again. I can't believe Wells treated you like this after everything." The other passengers watched this exchange in silence, many recording this powerful moment. A young black girl, probably around 12, watching with her parents, looked at Sarah with undisguised admiration. Captain Rodriguez checked his watch again. "Dr. Thompson, we should head to the aircraft. The weather window to Boston is ideal right now." Sarah nodded, then turned to address the crowd one final time. "Thank you all for witnessing this. Change only happens when people are willing to speak up and stand firm." She looked directly into the nearest recording phone. "This isn't just about me. It's about every qualified person who's been doubted, questioned, or blocked simply because they didn't fit someone's preconception of what success looks like." As Davidson escorted her toward the jet bridge, the terminal erupted in spontaneous applause. The young black girl whispered to her mother, "Mom, I want to be just like her when I grow up." The videos were already spreading across social media platforms, and this was only the beginning of a story that would spark a national conversation about bias, prejudice, and the faces of excellence in modern America. Within hours of Dr. Sarah Thompson's encounter at the airport, social media exploded with the video footage. Jenny Chen, a college student who had been waiting for her own flight, had posted the clearest video of the incident. Her caption read, "Watch this black female neurosurgeon get harassed by racist security guard. Plot twist at the end will shock you. Hashtag flying while black, hashtag Dr. Thompson." The video spread like wildfire. By noon, it had reached 1 million views on TikTok. Twitter users were sharing clips of the most powerful moments. Wells' aggressive stance, Sarah's calm responses, and especially the emotional revelation about Emma Martinez's surgery. Sarah's flight was halfway to Boston when her phone started buzzing nonstop with notifications. Her sister called her 3 times before she answered. "Sarah, you're trending," her sister exclaimed. "Every major news network is trying to get in touch with you. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News." In the luxurious cabin of the private jet, Sarah took a deep breath. This wasn't what she had wanted or expected when she woke up this morning. She had simply wanted to get to her conference and share her medical research. Back at the Atlanta terminal, things were chaotic. Reporters had already gathered outside, trying to get comments from employees. The young black girl who had watched everything unfold had convinced her parents to let her talk to a local news crew. Dr. Thompson showed me that nobody can tell you what you can't be, the girl said, her braces glinting in the camera lights. I want to be a doctor too, and now I know I shouldn't let anyone stop me. Inside the terminal, Wells sat in his supervisor's office, watching his face appear on news websites and social media feeds. His expression of disgust when Sarah mentioned being a neurosurgeon had been captured perfectly, becoming an instant meme. People were already calling him Terminal Terry, joining the ranks of Karen and Ken in viral infamy. Emma Martinez's father had also been interviewed. Tears streamed down his face as he showed reporters a photo of his daughter with Dr. Thompson after the successful surgery. "This woman saved my child's life," he said, his voice shaking. "And that guard treated her like a criminal because of her skin color." By early afternoon, the aviation company's CEO, Robert Williams, was forced to call an emergency board meeting. Their company was trending for all the wrong reasons, and their stock price had dropped 3% in just hours. "We need to get ahead of this," Williams told his team. "The videos make us look terrible. Do we know anything about Dr. Thompson's history with our service?" His assistant pulled up Sarah's client file. "Sir, she's flown with us 8 times in the past year. She's one of our most respected clients. She's performed emergency surgeries in 3 different cities using our service." Major companies started pulling their social media ads from feeds showing Wells' face, not wanting to be associated with the controversy. Hashtag boycott Atlanta Privatier started trending, even though that wasn't the actual name of the company. Sarah's medical conference organizers were also dealing with the fallout. They decided to make her keynote speech the opening presentation instead of waiting until day 2. Dr. Thompson's experience highlights exactly why diversity in medicine matters, the conference director announced. Meanwhile, in the economy section of a commercial flight to Florida, Wells' daughter watched the videos of her father in horror. She quickly made her Facebook profile private as friends started messaging her about her dad's behavior. By late afternoon, civil rights organizations had gotten involved. The NAACP released a statement. "Dr. Thompson's experience is not unique. It represents a pattern of discrimination that continues to plague our society, even in its most prestigious spaces." The most shared response came from a group of black female doctors who started posting their own credentials and stories with the hashtag what a doctor looks like. Their photos and experiences flooded social media, creating a powerful statement about representation in medicine. As her plane began its descent into Boston, Sarah looked out the window at the city below. She hadn't asked for this attention, but maybe, just maybe, her experience would help change things for someone else. Her phone buzzed again, another news request, this time from Michelle Obama's office. The story was no longer just about one incident at an airport. It had become a national conversation about race, respect, and recognition in professional spaces. 2 days after the incident, Dr. Sarah Thompson stood at the podium of her medical conference in Boston. Instead of just discussing brain surgery techniques, she found herself addressing a packed room of doctors, journalists, and civil rights activists. The conference organizers had to move her speech to a larger hall to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. "Medicine isn't about what a doctor looks like," Sarah said to the crowd, her voice steady and clear. "It's about saving lives." The room erupted in applause, with many people standing and recording her words on their phones. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, the private aviation company was dealing with a full-blown crisis. Their CEO, Robert Williams, sat in his office watching more videos surface of Richard Wells' past behavior. Other passengers, mostly minorities, had started sharing their own experiences with the security guard. "Sir," his assistant said, entering with a stack of papers, "we've received 37 formal complaints about Mr. Wells from the past year alone. Most were never properly investigated." Williams rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. The company's stock had dropped another 5%. Major clients were threatening to take their business elsewhere. Even celebrities who used their services were posting negative comments on social media. In a small apartment across town, Wells sat on his couch, staring at the TV. His face appeared on nearly every news channel. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from reporters and angry people who had somehow found his number. His wife had taken their kids to stay with her parents, embarrassed by the whole situation. Emma Martinez, The young girl whose life Dr. Thompson had saved insisted on recording a video message from her home. Dr. Thompson fixed my brain when I was scared, the 11-year-old said, holding up her favorite stuffed animal. She made me feel safe. How could anyone be mean to someone so kind? The video went viral within hours, gaining even more views than the original airport incident. People started sharing photos of their own experiences with doctors of color who had saved their lives or their family members' lives. By the end of the week, the aviation company called a press conference. CEO Williams stood before a room full of reporters, looking tired but determined. "We have failed," he admitted. "Not just Dr. Thompson, but countless others who may have faced discrimination at our facilities." He announced several immediate changes. Richard Wells was permanently terminated. All security staff would undergo mandatory bias training. The company would create a new position for a chief diversity officer. They would start a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation. Security procedures would be standardized and recorded. All complaints would now be investigated by an independent committee. Sarah's phone rang as she packed her bags in her Boston hotel room. It was the Today Show, wanting her to appear as a guest. CNN had already called twice, but what caught her attention was a letter from a young black girl in Chicago. "Dear Dr. Thompson, I want to be a doctor too. Today my teacher asked what we wanted to be when we grow up, and I wasn't afraid to say neurosurgeon because of you." The aviation company's internal investigation revealed more troubling facts. Wells had been reported multiple times before, but the complaints had been ignored or buried. Several employees came forward about the toxic culture they had witnessed but felt powerless to change. Social media continued to buzz with the story. #WhatADoctorLooksLike had become a movement, with medical professionals of all backgrounds sharing their stories and experiences. Medical schools reported an increase in inquiries from minority students interested in healthcare careers. Late one evening, as Sarah finally returned to her Atlanta home, she found a surprise waiting. Her neighbors had put up signs reading "Welcome Home, Dr. Thompson," and "Our Hero." Children from the neighborhood had drawn pictures of her in a doctor's coat, their way of showing support. As she walked to her front door, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Emma Martinez. "Thank you for being my doctor when I was sick, and thank you for being brave when that man was mean. You're my superhero." The incident had started a conversation that nobody could ignore anymore. It wasn't just about one doctor or one security guard. It was about changing the way society saw and treated professionals who didn't fit traditional stereotypes. 1 week after the incident, the aviation company's boardroom was filled with executives, diversity consultants, and legal advisors. CEO Robert Williams stood at the head of the long table, his jacket off and sleeves rolled up. The past 7 days had been the most challenging of his career. "People want more than just apologies," he told the room. "They want real change." On the wall-mounted TV, news channels were still running stories about Dr. Sarah Thompson and the incident. The company's phone lines hadn't stopped ringing with reporters seeking comments. Lisa Chen, their newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer, stepped forward with a presentation. "We've analyzed every complaint filed in the past 5 years," she said, clicking through slides. "The pattern is clear. This wasn't just about Richard Wells. This was about our entire system." Meanwhile, Dr. Thompson was dealing with her own whirlwind of activity. She sat in her office at Atlanta General Hospital, looking at the pile of speaking invitations on her desk. Schools wanted her to talk to their students. Medical associations wanted her to give keynote speeches. Television shows wanted exclusive interviews. Dr. Thompson, her assistant, called from the doorway. "Michelle Obama's office called again about the book forward they want you to write." Sarah picked up a letter from a young black girl in Detroit. "Dear Dr. Thompson, I was afraid to tell people I wanted to be a doctor. Now I'm not afraid anymore. Thank you for being brave." Across town, the aviation company was making big changes. Security cameras were being installed at every checkpoint. New signs went up explaining passengers' rights and how to report discrimination. Every employee now wore body cameras, and all interactions were recorded. The company's new training program became a model for other businesses. They hired actors to recreate various scenarios, teaching staff how to recognize and prevent bias. The sessions were mandatory for everyone, from janitors to executives. "We can't undo what happened to Dr. Thompson," Lisa Chen told a group of employees during training. but we can make sure it never happens again. On the screen behind her, images showed the proper way to verify credentials and treat all passengers with respect. Social media kept the story alive. People shared their own experiences with discrimination in professional settings. The hashtag respect the credentials joined hashtag what a doctor looks like in trending topics. Other companies started examining their own policies and practices. Richard Wells, the former security guard, had moved in with his sister in another state. Job applications were rejected as soon as employers Google searched his name. His wife had filed for separation. His children faced bullying at school. Despite the hardships, some people noted that these were the consequences of his own actions and choices. Emma Martinez, now fully recovered from her brain surgery, became a minor celebrity at her school. She gave a speech at an assembly about not judging people by their appearance. "Dr. Thompson saved my life," she told her classmates. "She's proof that heroes don't all look the same." The aviation company's new policies included quarterly bias training for all staff, anonymous reporting system for discrimination, regular audits of security interactions, diverse hiring practices at all levels, partnership with civil rights organizations, scholarship programs for minority students. Sarah received a surprising letter from Wells's teenage daughter. "Dear Dr. Thompson, I'm sorry for what my father did. You saved Emma's life, and he treated you terribly. I want to become a doctor too, and I promise to be different." The medical community embraced the moment for change. Hospitals across the country started reviewing their own security practices. Medical schools launched new programs to support minority students. Professional associations created mentorship programs. 1 month after the incident, Sarah stood in front of a group of high school students at a career day event. "Success doesn't look like any one thing," she told them. "It looks like dedication, hard work, and perseverance. It looks like not letting anyone tell you what you can't do." A student raised her hand. "Dr. Thompson, weren't you scared when that guard confronted you?" Sarah smiled. "Of course I was. But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you are scared." The aviation company's story became a case study in corporate response to racism. Other businesses started calling, asking for advice on creating their own diversity programs. What had started as a terrible incident was transforming into a movement for lasting change. 6 months after the viral incident, Dr. Sarah Thompson stood in the newly renovated lobby of the Atlanta Private Aviation Terminal. A large crowd had gathered for the opening ceremony of the Thompson Initiative for Aviation Equality. The terminal looked different now, more welcoming, with diverse faces in the artwork on the walls and clear signs about passenger rights everywhere. "Today marks a new beginning," Sarah said into the microphones, cameras flashing all around her. "This scholarship program will help minority students enter the aviation industry, from pilots to aerospace engineers." Behind her, a banner showed the faces of the first 20 scholarship recipients, young people from all backgrounds with dreams of flying. The aviation company's CEO, Robert Williams, looked different too. The past 6 months had changed him. "Dr. Thompson taught us all a valuable lesson," he said to the crowd. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to open our eyes to the changes we need to make." The changes were visible everywhere in the terminal. Security guards wore body cameras with direct feeds to supervisors. ID verification was now done through a standardized electronic system. Staff nameplates included multiple languages. Complaint boxes were clearly visible at every checkpoint. The security team was noticeably more diverse. Emma Martinez, now 12 years old and fully recovered from her brain surgery, stood with her father near the front of the crowd. She wore a white doctor's coat that Sarah had given her, with "future neurosurgeon" embroidered on the pocket. Her story had become part of the terminal's training program. "Remember when Dr. Thompson saved your life?" her father whispered to her. "Now she's helping save the dreams of many others too." The incident had created ripples far beyond aviation. Other industries had started examining their own practices. Hotels, restaurants, and private clubs across the country were implementing similar training programs. The Thompson Protocol became a standard term for anti-discrimination policies in exclusive spaces. Richard Wells, the former security guard, had eventually found work at a small warehouse in another state. The experience had changed him too. He volunteered at a local community center, teaching young people about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of treating everyone with respect. Sarah's phone buzzed during the ceremony, another message from the publishing company about her upcoming book, Beyond Appearances: Breaking Barriers in Medicine and Society. The advance orders were already breaking records. Lisa Chen, the company's chief diversity officer, presented the latest statistics. Discrimination complaints down by 95%. Customer satisfaction up by 40%. Staff diversity increased by 60%. Employee retention improved significantly. The company's stock price had recovered and exceeded previous levels. The young black girl who had witnessed the original incident was there too, now wearing a future pilot t-shirt. She had been accepted into the first class of Thompson Initiative scholars. Dr. Thompson showed me that one person can change everything, she told a reporter. We just have to be brave enough to stand up. Sarah's medical practice had grown too. Patients came from all over the country, not just for her surgical skills, but because they trusted her strength of character. Her waiting room had become a place where young people of color could see themselves represented in the highest levels of medicine. At the end of the ceremony, Emma Martinez presented Sarah with a hand-drawn picture. It showed two figures, one in a doctor's coat performing surgery, the other in a pilot's uniform flying a plane. "This is me and my friend," Emma explained. "She wants to be a pilot, and I want to be just like you. Now we both know we can do it." The terminal's new training center, named after Dr. Thompson, would open next month. It would offer free courses to security personnel from other companies, teaching them how to maintain safety while treating everyone with dignity and respect. As the ceremony ended, Sarah looked around the transformed terminal. The same sun streamed through the same windows, but everything else had changed. A new security guard, a young woman in a hijab, smiled and checked IDs with professional courtesy. A diverse group of pilots walked through, chatting about flight plans. Children of all backgrounds played in the new waiting area. Sometimes, Sarah told a reporter after the ceremony, the worst moments can lead to the best changes. 6 months ago, I was just trying to catch a flight. Today, we're changing the future. She smiled as another group of scholars approached her for a photo. And this is just the beginning.